Welcome to day 2 of the second round of the National Consultation on Education 2021-2022 under the overall theme of Education, Passport to the Future. I'm DK Roster, here to moderate proceedings and encourage you to make this a truly consultative process. The Ministry of Education hosted a National Consultation on Education in November 2020 to encourage public discussion on emerging issues in the education system. Recommendations came out of that process, as well as more things to discuss and get input on. If you have not looked at the document yet, please visit www.moe.gov.tt, and that will take you to the home page. You then scroll down till you get to the National Consultation Education Policy 2022-2027. We ask that you tune in, weigh in, let your voice be heard in this process of guiding a way forward for education in TNT. Post comments and questions via social platforms. Join us live by calling 622-4010 or WhatsApp us on 776-0440. Now, the panelists for this session under the specific theme, Curriculum Reform. We have President of COSTAT, Dr. Gillian Paul, and Education Consultant and Educator, Mr. Harilal Seecharan. Dr. Paul, Mr. Seecharan, we want to thank you so much for joining us to discuss curriculum reform. And I want to start off by asking Dr. Paul, what's the importance of curriculum reform?
Curriculum reform is the way we get to the future. It is a constant process, and it has been evolving since schools began. And before schools began, curriculum is very broad. It's not simply just the subjects we teach. It's who teaches, with what resources, what is in the curriculum and what is out of the curriculum, what is hidden from the formal curriculum. All of those contribute to what students learn and what they assessed. So it's actually the most complex and, for me, very exciting framework to understand the educational enterprise. I love curriculum.
And this exciting framework, Mr. Seecharan, how do we look at some of those things and how do we weigh what is more important? Because we had Dr. Paul talking about informal and hidden curriculum, and how do those things play a part in what it is we deal with?
Well, one of the things you need to understand is that the curriculum is really the engine of the education system, and it really aligns with your human resource development for the country. In other words, it's the process through which we develop the skills, competencies, knowledge that we want in our workforce, and by extension, alignment with global competitiveness. So that is critical, and therefore, in terms of determining what goes into the curriculum, we have to map out what are the skills, competencies, values, attitudes, behaviors we want from our citizens coming out there. And there are two dimensions to that. One is in terms of citizens and the quality of life, but on the other side, in terms of the skills and competencies required to fulfill your workforce requirements and then become competitive. Within recent times, there are a number of factors which would have converged to make curriculum reform critical and relevant. The knowledge worker. Demands for the knowledge worker, persons who are innovative and creative in terms of business competitiveness. You have a lot of technological developments, programs, services that these knowledge workers use. You also have digital lifestyle, and if you look around now, everyone is into that digital lifestyle. And you also have to factor in the way students learn. We know that students learn by linking new knowledge with those that they already know through innovative and active engagement. And those things would have combined now to create a new model for learning, or a new approach to learning. And therefore, part of your curriculum, as Dr. Paul alluded to, has to do with not just content in terms of what is in there, but what are those skills, attitudes, competencies. And you would have heard in recent times a lot of talk about 21st century skills. So that curriculum reform is critical. It is a requirement to review the curriculum over cycles. And more than that, the pandemic has fast-tracked the development of technology to such an extent where now we have to play catch-up again as a country.
But sometimes it feels as though we're always a bit reactive in terms of having to play catch-up, as you say. How do we get a little more ahead of the curve in terms of strengthening the curricula, improving competency levels in terms of some of those areas that you would have mentioned?
Well, one of the things you have to do, and I mean, while I say playing catch-up, it's not that some of these things were not or have not been on the ministry's agenda. I mean, there may be issues related to how far we would have been able to move. But you have to define, and to get to the point, you have to define what are those knowledge, skills, competencies, attitudes, values, and behavior you want currently. You have to bring in those supporting elements. And in our case now, you would see a big thrust towards the use of technology, so that the pandemic, in a sense, and this reform process where we're looking at new policy, actually I see as an opportunity for us to do just what you are asking, getting us on board with current trends and practices in education.
And is that something I hear some sounds of assent from you, Dr. Paul?
So I want to cycle back to the first point made by Mr. Sicharan about the role that the curriculum plays in building the country's labor force and global competitiveness. And to point out that from the perspective of the requirements for the change of the economy, it's not only opportune, but in my view, it is absolutely critical, where we are looking at breaking into new industries in a way that would position us to be globally competitive, that we seize the opportunity right now created by the pandemic to transform the curriculum and to help us deal with some of the specific challenges that small island states have with respect to labor market, a tight alignment between supply and demand of labor. And one of the things that we find in the small island scenario is that we can overproduce graduates for specific occupations, and then you have the brain drain because the economy cannot absorb them. But within the new sort of flat global space that the technology has created, we as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago have the ability to transcend our geographical borders and the limitations of the local job market by equipping our citizens to work anywhere. And there is a trend now among millennials and Gen Z. One of the effects of the pandemic is that people are conceptualizing what they bring as talent, and talent can work anywhere in the service of any country. So the focus on technological skills and an enabling technological framework for the new workforce is certainly one of the most important benefits we hope to derive from the consultations and the opportunity to align the curriculum with where the new opportunities will arise.
But how does that reframing of narrative, reframing of self, looking at values and things that you bring to the table, juxtapose itself against a Facebook comment that you would have just received in terms of secondary school has too many subjects.
Right.
Jack of all trade, master of none.
Done.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we need to consider in terms of going forward is the differences we have among our secondary schools. And therefore, I think what the person might have been alluding to is the need for some degree of flexibility in terms of curriculum and curriculum implementation at the secondary school to cater for the needs of all the students. That also aligns with, individual needs and requirements in terms of maybe what careers I want to pursue. But I think there's a need for some flexibility to allow students the option of pursuing particular areas as opposed to what might have been the practice where there was a mandatory collection of subject areas that sometimes might have been overwhelming for some students.
And sometimes I wonder if we know the entire phrase in terms of master or jack of all trades, master of none is often better than a master of one. So it's a slightly longer thing, and looking at how being a generalist may have positive implications, but I don't know if the person was talking about, okay, well, you get your feet wet, you realize, okay, these are the things that I want to be a little more involved in, so you allow the flexibility to focus on those a little more. But we continue the conversation. We are speaking about the curriculum reform. We are doing that with Mr. Sicharan and Dr. Paul. Stay with us, we'll return with more.
Sowing empowerment through entrepreneurial development, SEED. SEED is one of the many grants the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services provides for the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. The program provides financial assistance to vulnerable individuals who are in difficult social and economic circumstances, but are willing to undertake a small business venture or engage in skills training for greater employment and income generation opportunities. The initiative provides for clients to establish or expand a micro-project or small business venture. Who qualifies for the SEED program? Citizens and residents of Trinidad and Tobago, persons 18 years or over, unemployed persons from economically vulnerable households with an interest in business and who have a business idea and are willing to develop a small business, and persons willing and able to undergo training to develop competencies and skills which will enhance their chances for employment or self-employment and income generation.
The program targets micro-entrepreneurs within our communities who are not eligible for traditional loan facilities and provides grant funding for up to a maximum of $15,000 TT for the purchase of goods and or equipment, as well as a provision of up to 7,500 TT to facilitate skills training at a recognized or accredited institution.
Sowing empowerment through entrepreneurial development, SEED, another initiative of the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. This was a production of the Office of the Prime Minister, Communications.
On Thursday, 1st July 2021, Dr. the Honorable Nyan Gatsby Dolly, Minister of Education, visited the Tranquility Government Primary School to ensure that all was ready for the 2021 secondary entrance assessment. 19,651 students nationwide wrote the examination under strict COVID-19 health protocols.
Schools are in a full state of preparedness for the exam. The children are out. They have all of their protocols in place for entry in terms of health and safety. The spacing in terms of how they've laid out the desks and the chairs, that is in order and in line with the health regulations. The children seem to be quite excited and happy to be out today to do their examination, the parents as well. And so, of course, we at the ministry are very happy to be able to have this exam happen today. It's been an uncertain time for our students. They have not been in school since March of 2020, and so we are very happy to be able to do that. I want to thank the staff at the ministry. SEA is a huge undertaking. It's a mammoth task, and in this environment, it was a lot more difficult, and I want to thank the staff for doing what was necessary to bring us to this point. And of course, the teachers, the parents, the students themselves for showing the resilience and ensuring that we can have the exam go off today. Well, the ministry's decision to reopen and how we reopen will be defined by our health circumstances, and so we take the guidance of the Ministry of Health. However, we have already started our discussions with stakeholders to bring together a guideline document such as we had for 2020-21 so that we can look at the possible reopening in terms of a physical sense, which is what we intend to get to. The Prime Minister has spoken very clearly on his hopes that this will happen. So we are working with that in mind to look at a guideline document that envisages a physical reopening in some sort. September.
This message brought to you by the Office of the Prime Minister, Communications.
Welcome back. We are speaking curriculum reform with Dr. Gillian Paul, President of COSTAT, and education consultant and educator Mr. Harilal Sicharan. Now, we had two comments come to us via WhatsApp, and we'll have you address them, please, Doctor and Mr. Sicharan. Should the curriculum be changed to focus past just assessment so that teachers can be more creative with the subjects and the way that they are in dealing with learning, as well as can Singapore math be introduced in primary schools? I don't know which one you want to start with.
Singapore math.
Start first, and then Dr. Paul will add. The teaching and learning process focus on the curriculum content, teaching and learning strategies, and assessment, so that the overemphasis on one dimension would create, I guess, a system which disrupts the process as it's supposed to. We have in Trinidad focused a lot on assessment and use assessment to drive the teaching and learning process, which is a problem, because the focus should be on student learning, so that while we may need to revisit how assessments are conducted, one, and two, focus more on formative assessment, which is really assessing and using the results to ensure that doing remediation and ensuring that student learning is taking place. And we disrupt that cycle where we teach, we test, and we move ahead. Somebody spoke about Singapore, but in Singapore you don't move ahead until all the students would have mastered the learning outcomes. So I don't think you need to remove assessment. I think maybe there's an opportunity here for us to relook at the whole assessment framework within the primary school and the secondary school, in terms of having consistent approach to assessment, information sharing, and also coupled with further training for teachers. I think we need to spend a lot more time in terms of training teachers, especially with assessment. What passes for assessment in Trinidad often doesn't meet the required standard. So that's my comment in terms of moving away from assessment as opposed to making it more effective and efficient to ensure student learning. Your other question has to do with
Singapore math in primary school.
You know, we live in a culture where if you package something good enough, it sells. In Trinidad, and I know as part of the training for teachers, we've provided resources manipulative to teach maths. And there would have been training using the same kinds of strategies that we now brand as Singapore maths. So that from where I sit, there's no reason why those strategies and approaches cannot be used or should not have been used in our primary schools to ensure student learning. But we're now looking for somebody from Singapore to come and tell us to do the same thing we should have been doing with the training that was done here.
Dr. Paul.
I'm leaving that alone. I'm going to talk about assessment and the question about not being driven by assessment. I'm cycling back to technology. One of the things that we have seen, certainly at COSTAT, with the pivot to the online learning, is that the technological resources and strategies actually facilitate a move away from the teacher as oracle and the student sitting and learning. So we have teachers experimenting with the flipped classroom, we have synchronous learning, we have asynchronous learning, we have students able to do self-paced learning, we have the ability now to allow tutors, peer group, without the time and space limitations that the traditional approach that we have had pre-pandemic to teaching and learning. So de facto, the pandemic has opened up the space for creativity. What I want to kind of urge us to do is to adopt a sort of evidence-based approach, a scientific approach to what teachers have been doing so that we can identify locally best practice. We tend, when we say best practice, to default to international benchmarks, but there are many, many examples of excellent teaching practice in Trinidad and Tobago that do not get the focus of the research and the diffusing to other sectors and spaces within the education sector that they should.
And it's not quite a pushback, but I'm asking for a little bit of qualifying or nuance. Is it easier to, in your perception, to have this level of creativity at a tertiary level institution where the teacher may be a little more comfortable pulling back from being the oracle as opposed to the bastion of all knowledge?
I've actually seen, because I have young cousins who I watch them teach, doing the learning by themselves. I think the challenges at the primary and less so at the secondary level are resource-based and teacher training-based resources, but not the possibility that the technology holds for both teachers and students to engage more creatively with content.
And we have a Facebook comment that I think kind of tracks back to what you were saying, Mr. Citran, in terms of it's not a matter of saying, okay, well, we have some people who've passed this assessment and they can move on, but it's a matter of making sure that everyone has learned, everyone has achieved this level of competence. And the Facebook comment is saying there needs to be a curriculum reform for students who are not academic. Give them math and English and simplified other subjects and trades. Let them leave secondary ready. Let them leave secondary school ready to work. And I think trades can come in a little ticklish because I have thoughts on that as well, but let me ask you what you think of it as first blush,
let me first say that, you know, every time I hear the term
Trades.
no, but for trades, that students are not academically inclined, I cringe. Because philosophically we believe that all children can learn. They learn at different pace, they have different styles of learning. And I think in terms of reforming the curriculum, we need to cater for that. Some students may take a little bit longer to get there. So there are fundamental skills coming through the primary and even the secondary schools system that all students should master. Having said that, and I just lost my train of thought in terms of the question, but having said that, I think it is possible. I like the comment that Dr. Paul made in terms of the use of technology. I want to add my piece to that in that our students are actually better prepared for the use of the technology than us adults and teachers. And therefore, there are numerous opportunities and innovative practices, teaching and learning strategies, assessment strategies that the young people will gravitate towards that is much more interesting and therefore should contribute to the outcomes that we want. I think we need to pay attention to teacher training. It is a significant area that we need to treat with, and also issues relating to resources. Now, while we talk technology, we have to ensure that those enablers are in place. So whether it is computer adaptive software for students who may have special needs also that can be used, whether it's the software that can assist teachers in developing assessments, the online platforms that can facilitate classroom interaction and student-teacher interaction. Those are things that are necessary. We still need to talk about ensuring that everybody have access to devices. We need to still talk about bandwidth and connectivity. So those are things that must be put in place to support what we are trying to do. Not impossible. It may not happen overnight. It may take some time. But I think if we are clear in terms of where we want to go, and we put strategies in place to get there, we can have those desired outcomes that we want.
And it seems, Mr. Citron, as though you got the question, because it seems as though you answered a question that we had coming in about the infrastructure needed to integrate technology into the education system. But I want you to expand on that a little bit, please, Dr. Paul, in terms of saying what the educators at COSTAT are experimenting with, and how you decide, okay, this is the piece of technology that I'm going to use to address the situation.
Okay, so I think most of the country knows by now that COSTAT serves a very diverse student profile. And because of that, we don't have a monolithic approach to anything. That's why we try to do it evidence-based, so that we do diagnostics and we understand what particular students need. And the teachers are trained. We, in fact, did an online certificate. And we have made it mandatory, but we've encouraged all the teachers to do it so that they have a range of strategies that they can adapt. And it goes back to the point that Mr. Cicharan made about the flexibility that is required to optimize learning outcomes. I want to underscore that I am exactly where Mr. Cicharan is with regard to that students who are not academically inclined and the trades. And I'm going back on my word about international benchmarking, because I think it is an important point that the German economy is the strongest economy because they don't make a distinction between trades and academic. The TVET element that we consider not for the academically inclined is an integral part of the German education system, all the way up to the master's level. And that is why they are well positioned to maximize the impact of education on their workforce. And until we stop that sort of artificial separation between academic and technical vocational, we will not enable our students to realize their potential. Furthermore, there is an underlying, not articulated position that says that the academics have better options than the trades. But those of us who try to get skilled trades persons know that that is an artificial and misconception about the value of those two types of learning and the jobs that can be created. So that's something we have to let go. It's part of a sort of elitist colonial system. And when we talk about curriculum reform for the 21st century, trades have evolved around technology and are driving innovation in many economies.
And in that sense, I want to carry it further than saying it may be an artificial misconception, and I think it's a downright untruth.
It is.
But at the same time, we continue the conversation. Keep your comments, your questions coming. Thank you so much. As we discuss curriculum reform, stay with us. We return with more.
World Book and Copyright Day is observed on April 23rd by the United Nations to highlight the magical powers of books. Here in Trinidad and Tobago, a magical 4-year-old was recognized by the Ministry of Education.
My name is Corinne Clark and I am from Trinidad and Tobago.
Corinne presented a magical idea to her mother, Dion Clark, who was enchanted but didn't realize Corinne's power.
She came and she said to me that she wanted to write a book. Now, it's not that I didn't think she was capable of writing a book, but I really didn't pay much attention to her. And she kept saying it until eventually I guess she got fed up of asking me and not getting the responses that she wanted. And she just started to write, and she kept going on, and she just writing until the 3rd or 4th day, she showed me the book that she was writing in, and I called my husband. I was like, Ron, look at this, because she had the name of the book, she had the format just how it is in the book that's actually published. That's how she had it.
Little Corinne chose to share her world and her message with other children across the planet.
Okay, so this book is about all my talent and all the fun things I do with my family. To all the children everywhere, you are beautiful, you are smart, you are kind, You are good, you are brave, you are strong, you are brilliant and one of a kind. You are important. For all my friends. Hello, my name is Corinne Clark and I am 4 years old. I'm actually 5 now.
Even the Minister of Education, Dr. the Honorable Nyan Gadsby Dolly, was mesmerized by Corinne's talent.
I can tell you that it takes parenting that allows for children to express themselves to result in something like this today. And this is one step, and she's going further, and who knows what she will end up being and doing. And it's a note for all of us parents that we have to allow our children to explore. And it's a note for us as well that COVID-19 and the emanating circumstances have been difficult. But there are also little nuggets of gold that we can pull out of the experience. Corinne's book is one such positive. And so, Corinne, on behalf of the ministry, we want to congratulate you. We want to encourage you to keep on pushing, because you don't know who you may inspire. You may inspire someone who has written a book of poems and has not published it yet to do so.
And so, Corinne's mummy made a proclamation to all mummies across the land.
Really listen to children, pay attention to their interests, because they show us from very early on who they are and who they could be.
The Chronicles of Corinne, 7 Days of Fun, a book written by 4-year-old author Corinne Anaya Clark, is available at bookstores across the nation.
This was a production of the Office of the Prime Minister, Communications.
Welcome back. We are discussing a curriculum reform with Mr. Harilal Sitaran and Dr. Gillian Paul, and we are inviting you to keep your questions and comments coming. And Mr. Sitaran, we had a response via Facebook saying that for what Mr. Sitaran said to work, there must be constant observation of students' aptitude at primary level. Then students can be streamlined to the appropriate institute to develop that focus. And I want to get your response on that, but I may just want to tweak aptitude to competence.
You know, as you read the statement, I was thinking about the German system, where the movement from what we call primary to secondary, which places some students in technical, vocational institutes and all of that, really does just that. You look at students within the primary school system, and again, based on the aptitude and the abilities and whatever, and I guess their choices, they are placed in. So it's something that I don't know. I mean, we are looking at that transition from primary to secondary school if it's something that is plausible here. But certainly, if I go back to the fundamental of students in schools and teachers knowing, I'm not talking about individual students, their aptitude, their abilities, their skills, their learning styles. If that is done, and it should really be part of the process for ensuring that our students achieve those learning outcomes we want. So I agree. There may be also the need for a system of monitoring practice in schools. You know, one of the things that has surprised me, and we haven't changed, is the isolation of teachers in the classroom. So within a school, teachers do what they have to do in the classroom. Nobody, I mean, while there should be people looking at what is happening in the school and monitoring, that's not happening. We spoke about the use of technology. The research has shown that those schools and those jurisdictions that have succeeded in terms of using it, there is a community of learners. In other words, departments and teachers work within the school collaboratively in terms of implementing the change, supported by effective leadership. You also have that community of learning across schools or within districts So those are some things that we are hoping that this curriculum reform process and the training that we are advocating will actually bring to the fore.
But when you say, yes, you agree with the individual's comment and there should be a system put in place, I can hear some educators asking, because you already spoke to the isolation of teachers in classroom, who they're going to give that job to do that?
We have to, let me just step back a little bit. We have to have leadership at the level of the school. We have to act. Dr. Paul spoke earlier about data-driven decision making, so that we are at the point where we need to start using the data to inform what we're doing. Use of data creates cognitive dissonance, which is the root of change. In other words, we have to start questioning. If what we are doing is not working, then we have to start using that information. If this is not working, then we need to try something different. Like any change process, you may not get everybody on board, but creating a vision for where you want to go and a pathway supported by your leadership, by resources, etc., I think it is possible. But those are some things that we need to start looking at in our schools to get done. In other words, we need to start looking outside of the box on what is a routine practice in many of our schools.
And I want to get your point on that, please, Dr. Paul. Just before we encourage you, you can also give us a call at 622-4010. So join us live in this conversation. But in terms of that leadership, Dr. Paul, as someone at the helm of an organization, I want to get your response to that. I also want to throw in the caveat in terms of, can we be decentralized enough so that we have someone who is at the helm and says, this is the step that we're going to take, even if it's let's call it a pilot project versus saying, okay, we're going to be our own guinea pigs. But we can't keep on doing the same thing and expecting different results.
Right. And so the leadership that Mr. Sicharan and I are agreeing about is not a sort of prescriptive leadership that says, this is the turnkey solution, this is the correct way it has to be done, and I'm monitoring to make certain that you do it as we have prescribed. The leadership has to be an enabling and an empowering leadership, because it recognizes teachers have differences, students have differences, resources contribute to differences, and it is the responsibility of the leader to facilitate the learning among all the different elements by providing the knowledge and the resources. I want to be quite provocative about the statement that you made. As you know, I am DK, about who is going to do that job. That statement would emerge from my job as a teacher is to teach content. And if you ask me to pay attention to aptitude, motivation, and skill, I am shifting from teaching content to teaching a person. And so when we understand that our job is to understand the person, because that is actually going to optimize how we are able to teach content, learning styles, then that's not somebody else's job.
And in terms of that teacher training,
right,
we have a caller from Pleasantville. Good evening, Pleasantville. Thank you so much for joining us. Go right ahead.
Yeah, good evening, panel. Listen, as we speak about teacher training there, I thought about that and the way we train our teachers. Agricultural training, for example, and research-driven, where this technology is being embraced right now, because education being a critical pathway for economic opportunities. We are looking at where the education of the teachers and the way that no one is left behind, example, where people are now climbing this ladder, no one to be disadvantaged, where you see where people are deprived of higher education. Now, the teacher training, where they can teach children, for example, agriculture, where we can sort of strengthen our economy through scientific advances and stuff like that. How are we going to train our teachers along these lines for dispensing this practical knowledge to the students. That is a main concern, that we have students who, like someone said earlier, they are not all academically inclined, but when someone sees that what they are doing can at least end up in a university, while our universities are just catering for academics more, that we could identify students from an early age, that we're able to teach them anything, anywhere, at any time. That's the sort of thing that I'm looking at, where we train the teachers from kindergarten right up to secondary school, so that we can dispense this sort of scientific-based technology. Thank you.
Thank you so much, caller from Pleasantville. And Mr. Cicheran, Dr. Paul, you all have been speaking about teacher training and building that capacity as a common theme thus far this evening. How does that comment, or how does that suggestion from the caller register with you?
Well, I actually like one of the points he's making, which is we have a sort of traditional frame of teacher training, and one of the aims of the curriculum reform, particularly with respect to consultations, is for us to look at broadening our understanding of assessment. And so quite often we talk about getting students ready for the workplace by internships and placing them into the real-life environments. But we very rarely think about that element with teacher training. And so one of the ways that we can address the caller's point is to conceptualize of authentic teacher training by taking the teacher out of the formal classroom and placing them into the industries and sectors that they are hypothetically preparing students for. You would be surprised to know how many teachers are preparing students for jobs. The jobs have evolved long past when the teacher was trained, and the teacher is not intimately aware of what the industry practice requires. So internships and placements for teachers could be one of the strategies that we use to make the teacher training more authentic, and will reinvigorate. Teachers need a sort of refresher to be, a kind of getting back in touch with the passion that they had for the topic. And these types of placements can have that effect. Instead of the formal, go to class, get your diploma, get your piece of paper.
I fully agree with the comments that Dr. Paul made. The other thing is, and I think the technology has created an additional opportunity. He spoke about outdated practices and all of that. The technology and the availability of information, training, etc., online creates that, I guess, ability to engage with best practice from around the world. So in other words, it's not we had a traditional curriculum and you're teaching that from year to year, but you are now getting the opportunity or greater opportunities to engage because you may be using blended learning, face-to-face, etc.
And speaking about opportunities to engage, we have a caller from Arima. It seems as though we're talking about curriculum reform, but it seems as though the point of teacher training is something that's resonating with a great deal of people. So caller from Arima, hello.
Pleasant night, Mr. Rostand. Pleasant night to Dr. Gillian Paul, and pleasant night, Mr. Cicheran. Must say I'm very grateful for this forum. But there's something that I have observed, because since my time in school, I really find that the need for social workers and even guidance counselors or guidance officers in schools, it's in dire need, because even with this recent and ongoing pandemic, back then there were school dropouts, and imagine now, since a lot of children are going to school online, a lot of parents are working, and teachers are now combating with other social media platforms that would engage, children's interests. So I honestly find that much emphasis must be placed in getting guidance officers in schools, social work in schools, because right now we have a situation that is waiting to explode in our country, because I know that due to this pandemic, a lot of our children have gotten set back. And now too, we are also in the era where a lot of them now are following social media, music, and have the gangs, 6 and 9 and all of these things. And we need people who are trained in the schools to assist our children to make the right choices. I agree that the teacher would have their role and function, but in terms of maybe a guidance officer or a social worker who could help bring balance to their situation, because we need these kinds of things in schools to help save our community and save our country.
All right, so we want to thank you so much, caller from Arima. And Mr. Sicharan and Dr. Paul, while the caller from Arima was talking about guidance officers and social workers, there was someone who would have sent in a comment, I think that was via WhatsApp, looking at, in terms of curriculum reform, which is the topic for this evening, life skill programs implemented from primary school. The caller said that, well, the person said that is something that is necessary. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, in fact, at the primary school level and at the secondary school, you have something called health and family life education, which really focuses on teaching life skills in different areas, helping children to cope with different situations. I guess in the reform process, we have to look at how that bill fits back into the curriculum that we want to implement.
And we have life skills that cost that.
But sometimes it feels, okay, well, this is a finite container. There's a finite amount of time in school.
Right.
If you have to put something in or emphasize something that is already there a little more, what do you de-emphasize? How does that even out?
Let me just take a quick stab, because I want to come back to the issue of schools, how they're organized and managed, and the issue of leadership. You would be aware, for example, in the past that we have had situations with indiscipline, etc. in schools. In terms of strategies, there are schools where principals, having identified issues in schools, would have created, either brought in persons or created a program, even working with the guidance officer or the social worker in the school in terms of addressing it, so that you have something that is, let's say, timetabled with guidelines, and that's done in a normal basis. But I think sometimes we lose track of the fact that within a school system, there's the flexibility to make adjustment and bring in programs to satisfy your needs, as opposed to just, this is the curriculum we're teaching this down the road, whatever happened on the side will remain on the side. So there is opportunities, I think, for that to happen. As I said, it requires some thinking out of the box by some of our administrators. It ties in, I guess, to training again. But that's the kind of thing I think we need.
But I'm glad that, and just before you come to that, we'll come back to that after the break, because that also reminds me of what you were saying as teaching content versus teaching a person. We also have a question about the Caribbean exit assessment, why we're not necessarily seeing it introduced, but we deal with all of that when we return. Stay with us. We are discussing curriculum reform. Stay with us. We come back with more.
The government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago has made a $50 million investment in the nation's future. The Ministry of Education, along with its public and private sector partners, distributed laptops to several primary and secondary schools in its drive to digitize education. The first module in this digitization plan was the Adopt a School program, part of government's public-private sector partnership, contextualized by Minister in the Ministry of Education, the Honorable Lisa Morris Julian.
11 months ago, Minister Dr. Dolly and I walked into the ministry and she made magic happen. Her first initiative of Adopt a School program was a roaring success. And now I'm very pleased to welcome our colleague, Minister Alison West, as we take part in the digitization of not just the ministry, but every single school in the country with government support. The future is now, and I'm pleased to be part of this program.
Senator the Honorable Alison West, Minister of Public Administration and Digital Transformation, explained their role.
There are all sorts of opportunities that this movement into the digital world allows us. The Ministry of Public Admin and its agencies, the Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago and IGovTT, are committed to working with the ministry to ensure that the schools, the children and the teachers maximize this opportunity.
Education Minister Dr. the Honorable Nyan Gatsby Dolly.
This act by our corporate sponsors and what's happening today brings our students and our focus clearly before the country. Education has moved digital. We have had to do this from March 2020, and in that mode, it was emergency mode because we had to close schools to prevent the spread of the virus, and we knew that we had children facing examinations, and the only way we could connect with them was in the virtual world. And it's not just about the device, it's not just about the laptop. The Teacher Training Division, which has been instrumental in providing the training for our teachers so that they would use the tool well. For our students, understanding how they use this tool. When we speak about the optimization of our school learning management system, when we speak about the procurement of ebooks, when we speak about dealing with the learning loss in math and grammar through the provision of a service online, when we speak about digitizing all of our school records, we speak about that not in the far distance, we speak about it now. All of us here stand together as a team working in the best interest of our children. And we are so happy to have come to this point and to say that we are here now, we have far to go, and we are about the business of transforming education, not by magic, but by hard and persistent work. And we understand what is needed, and we will do what we have to do.
This was a production of the Office of the Prime Minister, Communications.
Welcome back to the National Consultation on Education. We are discussing curriculum reform with Dr. Gillian Paul and Mr. Harilal Sitaran. And we have a call, reminding you can call us at 622-4010. But we have a caller from Dibe. Hello, good evening.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hello.
Good evening, sorry. Good evening.
Hi, we can hear you. Go ahead, please.
Yes. I have been in the education system for 35 years and retired now. And there are some ideas that I have about the attitude of the whole education system towards students who don't have an interest in education and learning. They are in school and we have a large amount of them. And the teacher is trying his best or her best, and these students somehow cannot connect. And the curriculum is supposed to look at the techniques, the methods, and the systems in the world that can address this situation. And it is developing more and more so. And that may be because of so many psychosocial and environmental problems. But I have delivered a paper on the last curriculum reform on the effects of relaxation, breathing, concentration on reforming these students into listening to the teacher and trying to comprehend and follow in the line of education. So I don't know if it was taken up at all, but I have never been consulted after that. But it is generally along the line of meditation, breathing. There is a lot of research worldwide. Breathing in different parts of the lungs stimulate different.
Definitely. And we want to thank you for that, caller, and we also encourage you to actually go to the website, the ministry's website. That's www.moe.gov.tt, and make those recommendations once more, please, so that they can be in the bank of recommendations moving forward. But looking at that attitude towards students who cannot connect, looking at reforming students where they are, in addition to reforming the curriculum, there was a question via Facebook: how can parents be supported when a new curriculum is installed, and how can teachers be supported when implementing that new curriculum?
I'll take the teacher part.
Take the teacher part. I'll take the parent.
I think we spoke a lot about teacher training. I'm not sure we emphasize the issue of ongoing teacher training, so that it's not initial training and that's the end, go ahead and teach. It has to be supported with ongoing training, monitoring the implementation so that issues and challenges that arise with teachers can be addressed in an ongoing manner. The Ministry of Education has a curriculum division with persons who are trained in different areas. And I think part of what they do, I know for example, literacy and numeracy, you have officers who would visit schools and deal with teachers on a one-on-one basis in terms of issues identified. Whether we need to review that and make it more efficient, I think is something that we need to look at. But those are some things that can be done in terms of supporting teachers on an ongoing basis, because and it may not just be in a particular subject area, because when we talk about technology, it will be across subject areas. So that support has to be ongoing, and the support might be in the content areas, but also in terms of use of technology and ensuring that resources are available, etc.
And we want to speak to supporting parents after we speak with a former curriculum officer who is calling from St. James. Thank you for calling.
It's a pleasure. I wanted to say that to continue the discussion about support for teachers, because the curriculum as it is good. It's the implementation of the curriculum that is challenging when teachers are not given a lot of support and monitoring so that their work can be complemented or they can get help to improve it. I think that is one thing I would like to suggest. Another thing is that I would like for holistic education within the curriculum. The curriculum is good, but many of our children are not doing literature. I think literature is a very important part of developing the emotional intelligence of each person. So I would like to suggest that the literature at Form 5, it should be taught straight through to Form 5. Afterwards, for Form 6, you can choose. Another important point, too, because I've been director of life skills, I'm retired now, is that the life skills that we intend, that we speak positively about, taking place from early childhood education to tertiary education at on-the-job training level, we need our teachers to be better trained. And what is happening, and we know this, is that teachers teach what is examined. So we have to find ways if we actually do more than lip service to the teaching of life skills, is that we have to find a way that it's within the examination system. What is happening now is that in the secondary school, I wrote a paper for the UN about this. In secondary schools, life skills to be taught is given to the teacher who has some free periods and who really is most interested in her own particular curriculum subject, like maths or English or science, and really is trying her best or his best, but is not trained in delivering the life skills curriculum. And I would like that to be changed, because what is happening is that our youth are leaving school and they may have their subjects at CXC level or A level, but they do not have that development of their own emotional intelligence.
And we want to thank you so much. We want to thank you so much for that contribution. And one of the things that I got from that caller is support and monitoring, but not necessarily in a punitive manner, as opposed to saying, okay, well, if there's this gap, this is what you need. Let us work on filling that gap, as opposed to saying we're punishing you because you don't know, because time has passed. But I want to have you respond to that, please, Dr. Paul, in addition to supporting parents. How does that happen?
So I'm going to be a little provocative and speak about what we call cultures. And I'm a person where I am always leery of that statement that what gets assessed is what gets learned, because that in fact produces some very negative outcomes for our purported commitment to lifelong learning. We say that one of the things that is going to equip us to become knowledge workers, to be able to evolve continuously as our context changes, is that we must become lifelong learners, which means we must love learning. We don't only learn what is tested. And when we try to make everything that we teach examinable, certifiable, our students learn anything that is not in that frame is not worth learning. And that's why we have this phenomenon of students who are exhausted by the time they're ready for work, because they're running the assessment race. So we may have to consider in this curriculum reform breaking down all those old structures. Essentially, what we need to do is to bring all the stakeholders and parents who would have, I dare say, developed a deeper appreciation of the vital role that they have to play in facilitating their students' education and success, to figure out how to transform the curriculum in something that is less punitive, less around monitoring, and more around things that students perceive to be relevant. When I think something is relevant and can make a difference to what I want to do, I don't need it to be examined to learn it. And we have to that's why we have to talk about authentic assessment and problem-based learning, and think about the ways that young children learn of their own volition. Because the things that interest them, they go there. Are we making education interesting, or are we making it examinable?
And in that, you spoke about stakeholders involved. We had a question via WhatsApp asking about the role of the principal in this entire equation, and whether or not the principals are being consulted. So I'll ask you, Madam President, what's the role of the principal in
this? Very critical. The principal not only has to manage the school environment, and that means managing the resources, ensuring that we are focusing on doing the right things, equipping the different stakeholder groups with the knowledge and skills to do the right things. But from my view, the principal has to also be a leader in respect of what needs to be learned, because the teachers need to look at the principal as a role model, not just as a manager.
I also see as an advocate.
As an advocate, but they must be able to say, I'm going to talk to the principal, because I know the principal knows how to get this done. So the principal also has to be a lifelong learner, bringing new research to bear, helping teachers to understand why they should be changing their practice, where the new the discipline is going. The principal has a huge range of responsibility, not just the managerial and administrative. The principal, in my view, should be first and foremost an academic leader.
And I'll give you a minute to add your part to that,
I just want to touch, I think the caller spoke about development, holistic development of children. An observation of mine over the years, when you look at results and the students who are performing at the top, whether it's at the secondary level or the primary level, you find that those students are engaged, whether it's in physical, sporting activities, clubs, a whole range of things. And I think somewhere along the line, among educators, we have missed the point that focusing on all-round development of students actually creates a better student and who will do better academically, if we want to look at that. I think we've missed that point. And I think so. We've had students who engaged in dancing who wasn't performing well, and because of that engagement in another area, you notice that they started improving. And so I think that issue of holistic development is something that we need to look at, and therefore just focusing on what's coming on that exam is what has created a lot of the problems that we're having now in the system.
And we continue this conversation with Mr. Harilal Sicharan and Dr. Gillian Paul. And reminding you can also give us a call 622-4010 or WhatsApp us at 776-0440. We come back with more. Stay with us.
916 of the nation's primary and secondary school students will start the school year with brand new laptop computers. 15 primary and 15 secondary schools received devices from the Education Ministry, which is doing its part in government's drive towards digital transformation of the public sector. Education Minister Dr. the Honorable Nyan Gatsby Dolly explains.
There were still children that needed their personal device. And so the last count that we did in February of 2021 indicated 35,000 students indicating they did not have their own device. And so the means test was done subsequently. We have had 20,000 responses to the means test. And so it was necessary for the government to procure and provide more devices even after the Adopt a School program.
The Education Ministry has ensured not just the purchase of the devices, but that training is available for educators so they can provide a seamless transition from the classroom to cyberspace. Here are a few thoughts from those educators upon receipt of the devices for their charges.
I am Denise Edwards Ford, principal of the Chabonas Roman Catholic Primary School. I'm here this morning to collect 52 devices for my students. I am happy to be here to collect these devices because I know it will go a long way in leveling the playing field for those students who are needy.
My name is Ralph Peter. I am the principal of Karani Hindu School. This morning I'm very pleased to be collecting 80 laptops for the use of the children at the Karani Hindu School. So I must take the opportunity to thank the Ministry of Education for the provision of these devices.
My name is Amin Das Mahaber. I am the acting principal of Agostini Settlement KPA School, Chase Village. Today I received 37 laptops. These devices will become very useful to my students to access tutoring in their classroom.
I am Anne-Marie Prasad Singh, Principal Eldorado West Secondary School. I'm very thrilled this morning for this extraordinary experience of receiving these laptops on behalf of my students, and thanks so much to the Ministry of Education, and I look forward to working with my students to ensure that their education is well intact.
My name is Anne Sambrano, and I'm the principal of the Valencia RSC Government Primary School. It's a pleasure to be here this morning to collect 118 laptops for my babies. Thank you very much. From the principal and staff of the Valencia RSC Government Primary. God bless you all.
This was a production of the Office of the Prime Minister, Communications.
And we are at the National Consultation on Education 2022 to 2027 with Dr. Gillian Paul and Mr. Harilal Sicharan. So in terms of looking at how we create that curriculum, how we refine, make amendments, there was a question via Facebook asking whether or not students have been consulted in terms of what they're interested in, what resonates with them. Or it says, have we ever considered asking students or young persons what they might be interested in and include this in the curriculum? How do you go forward in terms of crafting a curriculum like that?
Oh, that's quite easy if you're a skillful teacher. So you have the ability to design activities within a discipline. And sometimes you do the lesson plan, but there's always space for you to solicit the students' views, for them to pick what they want to do as the activity, the research topic, and you can. And it's actually very effective when you do it in advance of mapping out the plan for the semester, so that you take the time to find out their interests, their aptitude, etc. Remember that conversation we had. And you get that information up front. So you're making certain that when you design the activities, they are relevant to the students. They tap into what they talk about as their career goals, but it means that you can't teach what you taught last semester. Every semester is work, because every semester you are honing what that content is to make it more relevant to the actual students in front of you.
Dr. Paul, you're giving me work.
Yes, I am.
I've gotten this lessons plan has been passed down from on high.
Work on the front end is going to make it easier for you, because you will have motivated students who are excited to see that the teacher is respecting their interests, and who you will not have to spend so much time monitoring, because they will be eager to learn. Work on the front end makes the work on the back end easier.
And this is something that we're even seeing anecdotally, where we have people calling in and saying now that they're growing a little more, so that the children see the importance of backyard gardening, gardening, as some people say. They're eating their vegetables a little more because they have more vested interest in it. Is that something you agree with, Mr. Sicharan?
Absolutely, absolutely. I know one of the things that the last curriculum attempted to do was to engage students in more hands-on activity, real-life situations. So you mentioned the issue of growing their own vegetables, but not only growing vegetables, but developing skills. So they were monitoring conditions, experimenting with it, taking measurements. So the other skills were being developed, and you're adding to that the value of vegetables as opposed to nutrient values, etc. So the last curriculum, which utilized that cross-curricular thematic approach, actually tied into student learning and the research into student learning and the outcomes. So you had students who, outside of the school setting, were doing it at home. So I think, you mentioned, what you mentioned there is actually critical to student learning.
But we have a question from WhatsApp asking whether or not we have enough experienced curriculum officers, supervisors and principals to kind of drive this process home.
I think we need to understand that what we are talking about is a process, right? So you may not start off with everyone having the same level of training, but you build on that as you go forward. I remember speaking to one of our senior educators in Singapore, and I asked them, how do you do it? Because they are, at the top, they've been doing very well. And I didn't see anything happening there that we couldn't have done. And I was told that we may not have the best plan, but we try to get everybody on board first. And we can improve our plan as we go forward. So that we need to understand, I think a lot of persons, when we talk about reform and change, they expect, okay, we're doing this tomorrow morning, all these things are going to be in place, and we're ready to go. That's not how it happens. It has to be a developmental process with a clear goal in mind, what we want, what are the outcomes we want, and how we get there. If that means training more curriculum officers or retraining curriculum officers, so be it. But it's a process.
And in terms of that process, we're asking you to be part of the process, going to www.moe.gov.tt and availing yourself of the opportunity to have your voice, let it be heard, and contribute so that we have more buy-in. It resonates with us because we say, okay, well, part of me is in this document, which is going to be furthering the life of education and therefore the life of the society in Trinidad and Tobago. But building once more, looking at building capacity, when do we have this done? How is it that we are able to do more work on the front end? When do we carve out that time in a policy manner, as opposed to just personality?
We talk about teacher training, and we always think about teacher training, or traditionally, we think about teacher training post the baccalaureate. So I go and I study math, and then I'm a teacher, and then I have to get some training. And, you know, one of the ways efficiently that we can try to build capacity quickly is to revisit what constitutes the curriculum at the universities in terms of preparation for teaching. It is quite easy using the same cross-curricular approach that was done in the primary school curriculum to weave into the disciplinary content in knowledge and skills in the science of learning and in teaching, so you produce more graduates who have a deeper understanding from the get-go of curriculum, teaching, and assessment. We don't want them to go into the classroom and then have to find that out. But that would require a national position that we want to ramp up capacity in the teaching corps, and so we're going directly to the curriculum for how we prepare teachers, to radically revisit that to see how we can make that more impactful.
And with that, I want to ask Mr. Sicharan, even before we look at the curriculum to implement, how do we get more hearts and minds having that paradigm shift so everyone is on board, all hands on deck?
Well, I think what we are doing today and the consultations that we've had in the past is part of that process. We need to engage stakeholders throughout the process, getting their views, their perspectives. Everyone's views may not be incorporated, but you take everybody so that, you know, the people become part of the process, and therefore when you have a product, you get ownership. That oftentimes is challenging, but we have to make that effort, and I think that is the first step. The other part of it, I mean, going beyond the development of the curriculum, is again engaging your stakeholders. Dr. Paul spoke about parents. Parental engagement in the system has always been a challenge. I think, as she mentioned, the COVID has really brought to the fore the importance of parents in their children's learning. But not just the parents, the entire community. One of the things in Trinidad that I think doesn't happen as much as it should is business and employers coming to the fore also, because at the end of the day, the output of the education system is the input for their workforce, and therefore they need to also be part of the process in identifying that worker, that individual who they would like to engage, what are the skills and competencies. So really getting everybody on board in terms of making and informing the decisions as we go forward.
And I really love that point in terms of the output of the education system is the input of the workforce. I know sometimes when people wonder what's in it for me, you can put it any place now.
Right.
So in terms of looking at the fact that there's this workforce that we'd want to have, is it that or private sector or the workforce reaches back? Is there a method of having this input on a continuous basis? Because yes, you may have the curriculum, and okay, the curriculum is changed. What happens next?
Right. So in the tertiary sector, we have program advisory committees that just for each program area that, or in principle we should, some of us have them in some disciplines. So the key stakeholders, employers, professional bodies, licensing bodies, Ministry of Education, they sit as part of the college's curriculum framework. and they routinely look at the curriculum, look at the graduate performance, identify changes in the industry which should impact on changes in the curriculum. And so they are part of the curriculum infrastructure. That would be quite easy to replicate at the primary and secondary level. You already have the National Parents Teachers Association, and so you have experience of how you integrate stakeholder groups into the decision making. And I think it's an excellent point that Mr. Sicharan made about the employers becoming more proactive in trying to shape the curriculum so that it has the right output for the workforce at an earlier point in the process.
And we're reminding you that you can continue to call us at 622-4010. And there's a question coming via WhatsApp. Is it that the ministry is moving towards a specific approach, tailor-made, or is it one size fits all?
No, I think it is the hope of all of us that this curriculum reform process will attempt to will address some of the challenges and the issues we have. There are many students who are currently not going through the system with the requisite skills and competencies, so we need to address those student needs. At the same time, you have students who are high performing but maybe not achieving their true potential, so you need to cater for those. You have students who may have special needs within the system, and in other words, we need an all-embracing curriculum where we can consider the child as opposed to a class or a school. And I think looking at the strategies, the incorporation of technology, bringing in some of the innovative practices, all of those things should add up towards facilitating the process, the teacher training, looking at the resources. All of those things need to really come together to accomplish what we are trying to do.
And with that in mind, we take a short break. We return with more. We are discussing curriculum reform with Dr. Gillian Paul and Mr. Harilal Sicharan. Stay with us. We return with more.
World Book and Copyright Day is observed on April 23rd by the United Nations to highlight the magical powers of books. Here in Trinidad and Tobago, a magical 4-year-old was recognized by the Ministry of Education.
My name is Corinne Clark and I am from Trinidad and Tobago.
Corinne presented a magical idea to her mother, Dion Clark, who was enchanted but didn't realize Corinne's power.
She came and she said to me that she wanted to write a book. Now, it's not that I didn't think she was capable of writing a book, but I really didn't pay much attention to her. And she kept saying it until eventually I guess she got fed up of asking me and not getting the responses that she wanted. And she just started to write, and she kept going on, and she just writing until the 3rd or 4th day, she showed me the book that she was writing in, and I called my husband. I was like, Ron, look at this, because she had the name of the book, she had the format just how it is in the book that's actually published. That's how she had it.
Little Corinne chose to share her world and her message with other children across the planet.
Okay, so this book is about all my talent and all the fun things I do with my family. To all the children everywhere, you are beautiful, you are smart, you are kind, you are good, you are brave, you are strong, you are brilliant and one of a kind. You are important. For all my friends. Hello, my name is Corinne Clark and I am 4 years old. I'm actually 5 now.
Even the Minister of Education, Dr. the Honorable Nian Gadsby Dolly, was mesmerized by Corinne's talent.
I can tell you that it takes parenting that allows for children to express themselves to result in something like this today. And this is one step, and she's going further, and who knows what she will end up being and doing. And it's a note for all of us parents that we have to allow our children to explore. And it's a note for us as well that COVID-19 and the emanating circumstances have been difficult. But there are also little nuggets of gold that we can pull out of the experience. Corinne's book is one such positive. And so, Corinne, on behalf of the ministry, we want to congratulate you. we want to encourage you to keep on pushing, because you don't know who you may inspire. You may inspire someone who has written a book of poems and has not published it yet to do so.
And so, Corin's mummy made a proclamation to all mummies across the land.
Really listen to children, pay attention to their interests, because they show us from very early on who they are and who they could be.
The Chronicles of Corin, 7 Days of Fun, a book written by 4-year-old author Corin Anaya Clark, is available at bookstores across the nation.
This was a production of the Office of the Prime Minister, Communications.
Welcome back. We are on the last legs of this discussion today, looking at curriculum reform. And Mr. Harilal Sicharan, I think I want to have you start with your closing remarks, please.
I think where people see problems, I like to see opportunities. I think the pandemic has created an opportunity for us to do some of the things that we weren't able to do to the extent we would have liked to do it in the past. I think the curriculum review at this time and the whole new policy direction of the ministry is critical if we are to move forward as a nation. So I am happy to be part of this, and I look forward to the outcomes.
Dr. Paul?
So I am too also very excited by the process, but most especially the position that is emerging that we don't have to proceed in a monolithic fashion to fix the curriculum, that we are a diverse country. Our education system, our school environments are all ecosystems in and of themselves, and they require what I would call a bespoke approach to improvement. And so our focus really, if we make evidence-based decision-making guide the reforms, we will be able to be more responsive and impactful to a wide range of educational situations within the country. And that can only redound to the benefit. When we try the monolithic approach, some persons always don't fit in and are left behind. So our approach this time around is to be as inclusive as possible by having the most flexible curriculum reform framework that we can fashion.
And it's very interesting what I'm hearing from both of you, Mr. Sicharan and Dr. Paul, because it also resonates with some of the conversation that was had yesterday with Dr. Talia Esnard and Professor Jerome Delisle in terms of supporting educators, looking at parents and guardians, understanding their role in the education a little more, looking at the fact that measures do not necessarily need to be punitive as opposed to encouraging and inspiring, looking at the fact that we have a lot of the answers, and when you go out and see what is happening in other models, it's not something that we can't manufacture within ourselves, but we also need to be confident in ourselves in terms of who we are. What do we need? And from being able to articulate those positions, then you can go forward and say, okay, well, we want this. We take a piece of this and we see exactly how it fits into the puzzle. But we want to thank you as well, looking at the individuals who would have called via 622-4010, sent us messages via WhatsApp on 776-0440, sent questions and comments via Facebook. We had someone totally agreeing with you about artificial segregation and fit for trade, Dr. Paul. But once again, we want to thank you so much, Dr. Gillian Paul, President of COSTAT, as well as Education Consultant and Educator, Mr. Harilal Sicharan. This is the end of this conversation with regard to curriculum reform. We want you to tune in tomorrow. Please go tune in and weigh in, where the conversation will revolve around TVET revitalization, which is something you also spoke about, Dr. Paul. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm DK Roster, looking forward to your continued engagement tomorrow, please God.
Education is the passport to the future, and the Ministry of Education wants your